If you're looking for an extremely spacious family crossover, but you want it to have some luxury elements, but you're not willing to pay the luxury maintenance or the luxury price, the Buick Enclave has always been kind of an interesting option. It's based on the same platform as the Chevrolet Traverse and the GMC Acadia, which we've already seen, but the Buick is the last of the family to be revealed unless GM decides that they're going to build another Cadillac XT6 off of this platform. Now, the Buick on paper is seemingly the most luxurious out of the three. However, Buick actually decided to send me a mid-level sport touring trim, which is actually a little bit less expensive than the last Chevrolet Traverse RS that I drove. So in this video, we're going to find out whether or not the mid-level version of the Enclave is actually nicer than its Chevrolet or GMC counterparts. So let's dive in and check it out. So now let's do a quick walk around of the Enclave. A quick glance at it will pretty much tell you that this shares a lot in common with the Chevy Traverse and the GMC Acadia, although each of those three vehicles has kind of their unique styling elements to set them apart, and the Buick is no different. Here up front, we've got kind of the new Buick signature look. I believe we first saw this on like the Encore GX, and it's now spread to kind of their other models. We have these checkmark lights here that are going to act as your running lights, and then we have the main headlight beam down here. I think it actually looks quite nice on the ST trim. We've got kind of the blacked out grille. You can see that we have our little ST logo, not to be confused with what Ford does with ST. That is a completely different ST, actually. And this cherry red tint coat color looks really lovely when done up with kind of the more black accents that you're going to be getting on the Sport Touring trim. We do have these two-tone 20-inch wheels here on the Sport Touring trim. You can actually get 22-inch wheels if you upgrade to the Avenir, which of course we don't have. We have the ST, another logo right there. I do like that the fenders are painted black. They're not plastic on this Enclave. Again, Buick is going for kind of a more premium look. It does have a very kind of machismo, macho, very tall stance here in the back. I'm kind of digging this C-pillar. I think it looks kind of cool there in the back. And then here we've got the connected taillight bar. A lot of automakers have been doing this lately. We've got the exhaust tips that are kind of fake, but you can see that the real tips are back there. And then we kind of have this big outlet back here. We have Enclave designated our model. We have our all-wheel drive badge. You don't get that if you get the front-wheel drive. And then we just have the Buick logo right here. And I should also mention that we do have the latest Buick logo that has now spread across their entire lineup. Now, as we step inside the Enclave, we're going to find out that just because this has a Buick badge doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be more premium on the inside than its Chevy and GMC counterparts. Those vehicles can get quite luxurious, and this can as well. But this Sport Touring trim is just kind of mid-level, if I'm being honest. So we've got these black leather seats. I really do like the white piping. I think that is a nice look here. But these seats are heated. They are not ventilated here on the ST trim. You're going to have to step up to the Avenir trim. I think the Avenir is really where you want to be on the Enclave if you're looking for that premium experience without the premium price. That gets you ventilated seats. You can also get massage seats on this. And if you're feeling really bold, they have this gorgeous light interior on the Avenir that has lots of blue accents on the dash. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. Your kids might ruin it because it is very light and very prone to scratches and stains and all of that, but it is a very gorgeous interior. But let's go ahead and step inside and see what changes Buick has made to this platform, which is also shared with Chevy and GMC. Of course, we have our push button start. Straight away, you're going to notice that the screen setup here is kind of what's going to be the main differentiator between this and the Acadia and the Traverse. We've got this 30-inch, they call it the premium ultra-wide display. They say it's the largest in the class, and you know, maybe because they're measuring it like diagonally, and this is all one screen. It is not two screens kind of broken. This is all one screen. So in that regard, it does look very impressive. But here's kind of the problem. Everything feels kind of crunched. I can't show you CarPlay right now because I have my phone to record, but I can show you the 360 cam because it basically illustrates my point. You see how little of the screen is actually taken up by the 360 camera. Now, GM has amazing 360 cameras, and these actually come standard on the Enclave, which is a really nice feature. But they're just very crunched and condensed because although this screen is very long and wide, it's not very tall in this direction, meaning that they've had to crunch this down and make it smaller than it is on the Chevy Traverse. Now, the Chevy Traverse has a 17.7-inch screen, and then I believe it has about an 11-inch screen here, and then the Acadia has like a big sort of vertical screen like this. And that vertical area helps them kind of fill the cameras out and just make it actually look better. So although this visually looks really cool when you're using CarPlay or when you're doing the cameras, it's actually worse than the Chevy and the GMC in my personal opinion. So while this is really good on the surface, I'm actually not that impressed with it in practice. Aside from that, it is still a really nice system. Wi-Fi hotspot, wireless Android Auto, wireless Apple CarPlay. So we've got all of that good stuff here. We've got 12-speaker Bose audio on the Sport, Touring, and Preferred trims, which is really not the best system I've heard, but it is pretty good. We do have 7 camera views standard there, and you get 2 extra via packages on this car. We do also have the digital gauge cluster here. You see it showing my music information, my tachometer, date and time. You can have it show other things as well. And then via a button on the steering wheel, you can change it to be a full color map. You can also have your Apple Maps up there if you're running CarPlay, or you can just have it be like the safety screen. Buick also gets a different steering wheel. That is kind of a nice touch, and it's rare for GM to kind of do different steering wheels with very different buttons than what you're going to get on the Traverse or the Acadia. It's not my favorite, if I'm being honest. Again, it's another one of those, looks great, but like I kind of have to reach to get some of these buttons, and I don't have the biggest, longest reach with my fingers. So again, it's one of those, looks better than the other vehicles from this platform, but maybe doesn't work as well. And you'll probably notice here, we do have Super Cruise here. Optional on all trim levels of the Enclave. It's about $3,700 to add Super Cruise for a 3-year period, which is kind of silly because I know optional on Traverse and Acadia, but on the top RS trim of the Traverse and the Denali trim of the Acadia, it's standard. So I don't know why Buick didn't even make it standard on the top Avenir trim. Weird packaging to me on that. And then we do have some pretty nice materials. I'd say a little bit nicer than the Chevy, maybe on par with the GMC, the nicest versions of it. Soft touch materials here. This changes if you get the Avenir. I think it's a little bit nicer. We do have our wireless charger right here, a volume knob kind of weirdly placed down here with a little storage tray. And then we do actually have, I'll open the door to give you a better look here at some really nice storage underneath this kind of floating console. But we are missing some stuff, like I said, ventilated seats, no sunroof on this ST. So it's not the most luxurious way that you can get this package. You can get a GMC and even a Chevy that's a little bit nicer than this particular Enclave. But if you are looking for all of those features and the most features you can get on this platform, you got to step up to the Avenir. And if you watched my video on the Traverse, which I encourage you to do if you're cross-shopping this car with other 3-row crossovers, go watch my video on the Chevy Traverse where I drive the RS trim and the Z71 trim. You can only get captain's chairs here on the Buick. So this is going to be strictly a 7-seat vehicle. You cannot get it as an 8-seater on this model. Now, these seats can be heated, but these ones on the ST trim are not. They are just regular leather captain's chairs. So again, kind of disappointing, but we do have a ton of legroom here. We have, I think it's a little over 42 inches of, 41 inches, a little over of legroom back here. That's about 3.1 inches more than the outgoing Enclave. Now the third row is actually a little bit smaller with a little over 32 inches of legroom. That's about like a little over an inch smaller. Now, the only way to get back to those is going to be this manual release here. We do not have the power eject seats. seats that is optional on the Enclave ST, but we do not have that package. I believe it's like a $1,300 package. That'll get you the power lift seats here in the second row. Those seats will also collapse from buttons in the trunk, and it also gets you a power third row, but as you'll see, we just have the manual one. Now, the legroom back here is pretty decent. This seat is all the way back, and as you can see, my knee is kind of just barely touching, but as an adult, I could fit back here just fine. I've got my USB ports, and I do have air vents up here as well. So this is a really nice back seat, one of the biggest in the class, if not the biggest. I don't think it is the biggest, but it is quite large. I'm going to go ahead and fold this seat down, which can only be done from right here, just so I can kind of show you the overall cargo space as we get here to the back. So let's go ahead and lift the power lift gate so that we can talk about the trunk space. So this is where the Enclave and its corporate siblings just really blow away the competition. These vehicles are enormous. We've got just under 23 cubic feet of space with the third row up. Really spacious back here. This is a really good amount of space, and if you need a little bit more, you have it underneath the floor here. So this is a really nice storage area under here. Like I mentioned, you can get a power third row. The controls for that would be right here. They do lower extremely quickly, but if you do not get that package here on the ST trim, you're just going to have to pull these straps. Not too hard, just, you know, a little bit more manual labor than you would be doing if you went and got that package. And now with the third row folded, you are looking at just over 57 cubic feet of space. And if you go over and fold down the second rows, you're looking at a class leading 97.5 cubic feet of space, which is honestly massive. The only thing that really comes close to competing with it is the Toyota Grand Highlander, but that is what the Buick and its GMC and Chevy siblings have always done really well. They've just packaged so much space in not that big of a car. That is the reason why you would really want an Enclave over pretty much almost anything in its class. All right, now let's get out on the road in the 2025 Buick Enclave ST. Now this is the second out of the 3 vehicles that I've driven on this large GM platform that underpins their very big and very spacious 3-row crossovers. The first one that I got to drive was the Chevrolet Traverse, which is, you know, the lowest positioned one. You also have the GMC Acadia, which can actually get quite luxurious, and depending on what options you pick, can actually be more expensive than this Enclave. But in terms of feature content and just how they market it and kind of how they designed it, the Enclave is supposed to be the most premium out of the 3. I don't know if I would go so far as to really call this a luxury car, just based on the underpinnings. And as we saw from this mid-level ST trim, it really just doesn't like punch high into that luxury territory. I think that the Ford Explorer does a much better job doing that because it is available with a twin turbocharged V6 with 400 horsepower. It's rear wheel drive instead of front wheel drive, but you can also get all wheel drive, and it has some really luxurious features like massage seats, although this has that too. But let's talk about how this kind of compares against the Traverse and the Acadia, because honestly, I think if you are in the market for a crossover like this and you go into the GM dealership, they're probably going to have all 3 of those vehicles available there for you to cross shop. And it's going to be up to videos like this to really help you decipher which one of those 3 is going to be best. So let's talk about the ways that this Buick is actually similar to both the Chevy and the GMC. And the first one is an obvious one. It's got the same engine, same transmission, same platform. We've got a 2.5-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. This is related to the 2.7-liter engine that's in a lot of the pickup trucks and stuff like that. Here it produces 328 horsepower, which is honestly pretty darn good for a standard engine in this segment, with 326 pound-feet of torque. Those are actually both really good numbers for this class, really good for a 4-cylinder. But my big complaint when I drove the Traverse was this engine doesn't sound good. It has some really bad noise, vibration, and harshness. It sounds very groany, even though it's pretty torquey and pretty powerful. It always kind of sounded overstressed, not understressed. And when I got out of the Traverse and into a Ford Bronco, which also has a 4-cylinder carrying a lot more weight, it actually sounded a little bit quieter, which kind of shocked me. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this car into its sport mode. Here it does have a sport mode. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to turn on all-wheel drive. Let's see how quickly I can get this thing to 60. Let's go. Pretty laggy off the line. There's 60. All right, so that was 7.99 seconds. So like I said, this engine does kind of feel not super powerful in a big vehicle like this. 7.99 seconds is actually about a half second slower than I measured the Traverse, which has basically the same drivetrain as this. So let me try and put it back into 2-wheel drive. I'm wondering if the fact that I locked it into the all-wheel drive actually made it a little bit slower, because it's trying to like manage slip and some things like that. So let's try this one more time here. I'm going to try to brake torque it a little bit higher. There we go. I've got it revving. Let's let go. It's about as much as I can get the power off the line here. 60. Okay, so that was 7.72. A little bit quicker, but again, you know, not super impressive. I think the Ford Explorer was just way, way, way quicker with its twin turbocharged V6. The one thing I will say, though, about the Buick, when I was full throttle accelerating like that, obviously the engine didn't sound great. But if I'm just driving this car kind of normally, the engine feels slightly less intrusive than it did in the Traverse, and there's a reason for that. The Enclave is the only vehicle out of the three, between the GMC and the Chevy, to have something called quiet tuning. It's basically sound insulation and sound nullification, noise cancellation that this car does, that the GMC Acadia and Chevy Traverse do not do. So I think when you're driving this car around normally, the 4-cylinder is not as buzzy, it's not as groany, it doesn't sound quite as bad to me. So I do think that if you are looking for the quietest out of the three, it's definitely going to be the Buick. It's really hard for me to tell if it's significantly quieter than the Traverse, but from just my memory of driving the Traverse just a few months ago, that car was really loud, and I'm not detecting that here with the Buick. So that might be one reason to get the Buick over the Chevy. Now, if I didn't mention this already, you can get this vehicle with front-wheel drive. We've got the optional all-wheel drive. Both of those are going to an 8-speed automatic transmission, which I feel like is actually tuned a little bit better on this car. I kind of doubt they changed the transmission tuning, but it does not appear to be revving as high as the Traverse did just in normal driving. So I don't know if maybe they fixed it, because this car came after the Traverse, so maybe they did change the transmission tuning. And I'm in sport mode right now, and I still don't think that the transmission is holding gears too long. It was super annoying in the Traverse, so another reason why you might want to get the Buick. The other thing that I could talk about here, I mean, I kind of can't talk about it, that the Buick gets that the others don't, is continuous dampening control. They call it CDC, you know, not to be confused with the disease center. That gets you adaptive dampers with sensors in the suspension that can react to road surfaces to give you a better ride. I wish I could comment on them, because they're only available on the top Avenir trim, and since Buick sent me this Sport Touring trim, can't comment on that. But what I can comment is on the Sport Touring suspension, which feels fine. Like, it's definitely not too taut. It definitely rides well. It is a quiet cabin in here. So if you are looking for a pretty comfortable, very large family vehicle that feels kind of premium, I think the Enclave definitely hits that marker. In terms of fuel economy, it's okay. 20 mpg in the city, 27 on the highway with front-wheel drive. Those numbers drop down to 19 and 24 with the all-wheel drive, even though you can run the all-wheel drive as front-wheel drive only. So that's a pretty big hit for the all-wheel drive system, if I'm being honest. And as we saw on the interior walk around, this is the first Buick that gets Super Cruise. It's great. Super Cruise is my favorite of the hands-free softwares. It's definitely better than Blue Cruise, in my opinion, overall, with the automatic lane changing. But I do think it's so weird that Buick made it optional on all trim levels of the Enclave, including the Avenir, whereas the top versions of the Acadia and the Traverse get it standard. So that's a little bit weird. Play around with your pricing when you go to the dealership, because just because this is marketed as the most luxurious out of the three doesn't necessarily mean it's the most expensive. In fact, this ST trim that I'm driving is actually less expensive than the Chevy Traverse that I tested a few months ago in the RS trim. So why don't we pull over and talk about the pricing, because it is kind of interesting. All right, so that's going to wrap up our time with the 2025 Buick Enclave. And like I mentioned out on the drive, the pricing for this car is rather interesting. So the preferred trim level is going to start at $46,395, $2,000 extra if you want to add the all-wheel drive. So you're looking at $48,395. And unlike the Traverse or the Acadia, there are no trims on the Enclave where all-wheel drive is standard. So $2,000 extra on top of any of the prices that I'm talking about. Now, in terms of positioning, $46,000 does place this well above the Chevy Traverse, but this does come with a lot more content as standard versus like a base Traverse or a base Acadia. But as we get higher up in the trim levels, we're going to see something interesting happen. So this Sport Touring trim is $48,795, $50,795 with all-wheel drive, as you see here. You can add some package like a towing package, the power second and third row. But other than that, there's not too many options that you have to add on this ST trim. So you actually can keep it under 50 grand if you want to opt for front wheel drive, and you'll be just over that if you get all-wheel drive. Now, the last Chevy Traverse that I drove, which was the top RS trim, I think came in at about $58,000. And if you load up a GMC Acadia Denali, it has like this Denali Ultimate package that's like $6 grand. That can hit over $60,000. Back to the Enclave, the Avenir trim is going to start just under 60 grand, so you're looking at $59,395, $61,395, but you got to add Super Cruise. That's about $3,700. There's really not much else you can add to the Avenir trim. It does come fully loaded, but that's going to place it very, very close to the GMC Acadia Denali with that Ultimate package. It is more expensive than the Traverse RS. We don't know how much the Traverse High Country is going to cost just yet. Now, this does get some features on that Avenir trim that the others don't get. It gets the adaptive suspension, it gets the noise cancellation, and it gets a massage seat. So those three features, if they are important enough to you, you should probably go for the Avenir. But I think styling wise, I think the GMC maybe has the best interior. The Chevy's definitely the sportiest. And if you're just looking at this ST trim, I kind of don't see any reason to get it over a cheaper Chevy or a GMC. I think the Buick is very handsome. I think it does have some nice features. I'm not as impressed with that 30-inch screen as I thought I would be. I think that the ones in the Chevy and the GMC are actually a little bit more functional. So I wanted to love this because I really did love the outgoing Enclave. I thought it was like a really nice, almost luxury car for like a really good price. And this kind of still is, but I think they've elevated the Traverse and the Acadia so much that they just needed to do a little bit more for me in order to make this really stand out. I am liking the fact that this is a little bit quieter, because boy, oh boy, was that Traverse a loud and obnoxious thing with the engine. So drive them back to back if you're at your local GM dealership and they happen to have them. Buy whichever one you can get the best deal on, but I really wouldn't, sacrifice too much if you can get a much better deal on a Traverse or an Acadia versus the Enclave, because those two vehicles are, in fact, very nice. Let me know in the comments, would you buy the Buick Enclave over the Traverse or the Acadia, or would you pick something else entirely, maybe a Ford Explorer, maybe a Volkswagen Atlas, maybe a Toyota Grand Highlander? Let me know in the comments, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell to be alerted of our latest videos, and I'll see you next time.